A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors, the Novelization. Chapter 6.
Awful quiet around here,
said Nancy, standing beside Max at the nurse's station. Kids are pissed off about not going to the funeral, said Max.
Can't blame them.
Nancy had argued with Dr. Madalena for a long time about that one, but the woman just wouldn't listen to reason. Rules are rules, she had said. Nancy wanted to tell her what she could do with her fucking rules, but had managed to restrain herself. By the way, said Max, I think I found out something about that house Kristen built.
Did you?
Nancy had mentioned to Max that she would be interested in anything he could find out about Hathaway House, but she hadn't really expected him to come up with anything. I found this old picture in storage, he said, handing her a large frame photograph. Nancy stared in amazement at the old photograph. It was a picture of the house on Elm Street, as it might have looked half a century ago. A dozen or so nurses in starched uniforms were stiffly posed in front of the freshly painted structure. Seems Hathaway House used to be some sort of sanitarium back in the late 30s. Sort of a halfway house or something for mental cases. Moved to Weston Hills during the war. Nancy studied the photograph for a minute and then looked up at Max.
Is there anyone I can talk to who might know more about Hathaway House?
Max nodded and pointed at one of the nurses in the picture. This lady here might be able to help you. Name's Miss Sapphire, just retired a few years ago. Lives in that old age home out just outside of town.
Thanks, Max,
said Nancy, giving the surprised orderly a grateful peck on the cheek. Then she grabbed her jacket and took off for the old age home. Hathaway House, said Miss Sapphire. She took a sip of tea and leaned back in her chair. The first of its kind, in a way, sort of an experiment in the treatment of mental illness. Only took women with really bad problems.
Psychotics?
asked Nancy. Miss Sapphire nodded. Only we didn't have any fancy names for it then. Possessed women, we used to call it.
How long did the place exist?
Oh, only a few years. A neighborhood started growing up around it, and people didn't much like having a house full of weird women so close by, you know. That's why the folks that ran the place moved it out of town.
To Weston Hills.
To Weston Hills, agreed Miss Sapphire. There was a long silence before Nancy asked her next question.
Did anything terrible ever happen at Hathaway House?
Miss Sapphire took another sip of tea and sighed. Many things, child, she said. Many things. The old woman opened the scrapbook that lay on the table beside the teapot and pointed to a picture of a pretty young woman. This one burned to death, she said. Still in her teens when she came to us. 8 months pregnant, wouldn't you know. Transferred from the old county hospital. The snake pit, they used to call it.
Still do,
said Nancy. Miss Sapphire nodded and continued her story. The way I had heard it, the girl had been sold by the orderlies for $500 for the worst crazies to have their way with while the staff turned their backs. Doctor said she must have been raped 1,000 times before she got to Hathaway.
How did she die?
asked Nancy. Died giving birth, said Miss Sapphire. The baby was huge, tore her right up. She was all alone and screaming for help when she knocked over an old gas lamp. Burned to death in her bed.
And the baby?
Burned pretty bad, but it lived. She paused and shook her head thoughtfully. Don't know what ever became of that boy. Nancy leaned across the table and looked at the woman's picture.
Pretty.
Pretty name, too, as I recall, said Miss Sapphire. Amanda it was. Amanda Kruger. Nancy lay in bed with her clothes on and tried to relax. "This is dumb," said Kristen, sitting on the chair at the side of the bed.
Sorry,
Said Nancy.
but it's the best I could come up with.
"I don't mean the idea," said Kristen. "I mean going alone. I should go with you. We'd have twice as much power together. You said so yourself, Nancy."
Too dangerous. Besides, I need someone I can count on to stay awake.
She thought of Glenn once more and felt a sharp pain in her heart.
Just wake me up when it looks like I have the glove.
"You've done this before, haven't you?" asked Kristen.
Quiet, please.
Said Nancy, ignoring the girl's question. She closed her eyes and started counting backward, very, very slowly.
10, 9, 8, 7.
And then she was on Elm Street. Nancy took a few tentative steps down the dark, tree-lined street. The house looked very far away, and Nancy found herself moving very slowly through the thick, still air. She became aware of a loud throbbing sound and realized it was her own heart. Suddenly, the idea of dropping in on Freddie unannounced and stealing his claw didn't seem quite so brilliant. Nancy picked up a heavy tree branch and moved closer to the house. She finally reached the porch and was about to go inside when something crashed to the ground beside her.
Kristen!
Cried Nancy, feeling a weird combination of anger and relief. "I thought you might need some help," said the girl, not realizing how close Nancy had come to bashing her head in with the heavy branch.
I will need help.
Said Nancy.
I just don't know if you can give it to me from here.
"I don't know either, but I couldn't just sit there and wait." Kristen looked around and took a deep breath. "Any sign of the bastard yet?" Nancy was about to reply when she heard the low, menacing growl of a very large dog. Both girls turned to face the beast, but the huge creature they saw was not like any dog either of them had ever seen before. The massive German Shepherd with the red and green striped fur had the leering, burned face of Freddy Krueger. Nancy and Kristen dashed into the house as the great beast lunged forward, a long string of thick saliva hanging from its half-human, half-canine jaws. The girls ran down a long, unfamiliar highway, while the creature crashed through the closed door. The sound of its raspy breathing seemed to fill the entire house.
The cellar,
whispered Nancy, taking the younger girl by the hand and leading her down a seemingly endless stairway. There was a kind of hazy fog in the air, and Nancy proceeded cautiously through a large iron door to the old furnace.
This is where my mother hid the claw,
she said, pulling open the door to the firebox. "Help me!" said Jennifer, her head lodged awkwardly inside the firebox as maggots slowly but steadily devoured her bloody face. Nancy screamed and whirled around only to see Freddy, no longer in canine disguise, lashing out at Kristen with the razor-tipped glove he wore on his right hand. The blades cut deep, and a thin stream of blood began to flow from the girl's wounded arm. Nancy grabbed her by the other arm and pulled her away, dragging her up the stairs and into another winding hallway that seemed to lead nowhere. "Somebody please help us!" gasped Karen, her left arm throbbing painfully. She thought of the strongest person she knew and called his name out loud. Suddenly, Kincaid disappeared from his hospital bed and crashed into the corridor a few feet behind Freddy. Immediately, Freddy wheeled around and raised his claw, surprised but delighted by the unexpected arrival of a new victim. What he hadn't counted on, however, were Kincaid's keen survival instincts, honed to a fine edge by years of street fighting. It only took the huge teenager a fraction of a second to recognize the threat present in Freddy's gleaming blades, and that second was all the time he needed to plant his massive fist squarely between his assailant's eyes. "Joey," said Kristen, closing her eyes and picturing the boy in her mind, strong and graceful as he was in the world of dreams. "Laredo, Taryn." And one by one the dream warriors slipped out of their everyday reality and answered Kristen's summons to the world of dreams. It was Joey who landed the next punch, his fist landing on Freddy's jaw with tremendous force as Kincaid floated away from the creature's downswept claw. "Way to go!" said Laredo, quickly accepting the bizarre fact that he was now inside someone else's dream. Without a moment's hesitation, Laredo joined his hands together as if in prayer. His hands seemed to fuse together and grow, turning first into a pair of large cymbals and then into a whirring buzzsaw. "Cover me!" he called to Taryn, swiftly advancing on the cowering Freddy. The girl opened her mouth and spewed forth a great orange flame. But now Freddy was on his feet, and he loomed above the brave teenagers, 3 times his normal size, with claws like enormous razor-edged swords. Laredo stopped in his tracks and looked to the others for help. Nancy hollered for them to get out of there, knowing as does any good leader when it's time to sound retreat. She grabbed Kristen's good arm and the others all joined hands. "What about the claw?" asked Kristen. Nancy told her to forget the claw and to just get out of here. "I'll get it," said Joey, releasing Taryn's hand to leap high into the air and kick the advancing giant hard in the chest. Freddy toppled to the ground, suddenly reverting to his normal size. Joey jumped on top of him and yanked the bladed glove off his right hand. "Get out of here!" he shouted, tossing the terrible claw to Nancy as Freddy began struggling to his feet. Kristen looked at the claw, now in Nancy's hand, for a split second and then closed her eyes. Suddenly she was back at the hospital. A moment later, Nancy, Kincaid, Laredo, and Taryn crashed to the floor beside her. Max raced into the room and immediately saw the blood on Kristen's arm. He was about to call for help when Dr. Madalena appeared. "What in the bloody hell is going on around here?" she demanded, surveying the scene from the doorway. "And what are you doing here?" she asked Kristen, apparently more disturbed by the girl's unauthorized presence in the hospital than by the bloody wound on her arm. Before Kristen could speak, Dr. Madalena turned her accusing eyes on Kincaid. "I swear to you, Kincaid, if you're responsible for all of this—" "It was the man in the nightmare," said Kincaid. The others nodded their heads. Dr. Madalena looked from face to face and decided that further questioning at this time would be pointless. Besides, it had finally dawned on her that Kristen was in desperate need of medical attention. "Get her to the ER, she told Max, "and then call her parents and readmit her. The rest of you, get to bed immediately. And as for you," she said, turning to Nancy, "who the hell do you think you are to be playing dangerous games with my patients?" Dr. Madalena saw the bladed glove in Nancy's hand and yanked it away from her. "Maybe you'd like to explain this monstrosity to the police." Nancy opened her mouth to explain, but found she was too weary to even speak a word. "I want you out of here now, Thompson," said the dragon lady, her eyes glowing with hatred. "And if you ever dare set foot in here again, I will personally see to it that you're committed to this institution for the rest of your pathetic, natural-born little life." She turned and stalked out, leaving Nancy all alone to reflect on all that had happened. That's when it occurred to her that someone was missing, and she then said aloud that Joey was still back there. "Come on out, Kruger!" shouted Joey, never feeling so alone or helpless in his entire life. This isn't even my dream, he thought, waiting for Kristen to bring him back to whatever safe haven the others had retreated to. "Come on!" he shouted again with forced bravado. "I'm your worst nightmare now, you ugly, burnt son of a bitch!" Slowly he walked down a long, dark hallway, prepared for Freddy to jump out at him at any moment. He saw an open door at the end of the hall and took a deep breath. "Let's get this over with, Freddy," he said aloud as he stepped into the room. To Joey's delight, however, the figure reclining on the frilly pink bedspread bore no resemblance whatsoever to Freddy Krueger. "Hi, Joey," said the girl in the skimpy black negligee. "Remember me?" "Beth Dorset?" whispered Joey, too stunned to contemplate the improbability of it all. Beth had been the subject of Joey's most intense private fantasies ever since junior high school. The fact that she and her fancy friends always made fun of him hadn't deterred him from imagining almost daily what it would be like to hold the exquisite girl in his arms. "You've changed, Joey," said the girl, rising from the bed and moving toward him. "You're so handsome now, so sexy." Joey swallowed hard and tried not to stare at her lush cleavage. "Don't you like me anymore?" she pouted, the back of her hand softly caressing his reddening cheek. "Don't you want me, Joey?" "I know I want you." The bedroom door closed while Joey and Beth embraced, their kisses growing increasingly passionate as the girl plunged her tongue into the boy's open mouth. It took Joey a few seconds to realize that her thick tongue was growing rapidly, snaking deeper and deeper down his throat until he began to gag. He tried to let go, but she held him in an iron grip. Joey began screaming in agony as the serpentine tongue worked its way into his skull, popping out his right eye before doubling back to push his other eye deep into his hemorrhaging brain. "You're such a good kisser," Freddy croaked, resuming his own horrible form. Joey toppled over, clutching at his empty eye sockets as he fell onto the dirty red and green striped bedspread. The four posts of the old bed suddenly came to life, four powerful arms grabbing each of Joey's limbs and pulling him tight as a rubber band, suspending him in midair above the stained mattress. His body stretched beyond the breaking point until it snapped into a sickening spray of blood and shattered bone. Back at Weston Hills, Kristen Parker had begun to weep uncontrollably. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been Chapter 6 of A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors, the novelization by Jeffrey Cooper. Gotta say, tonight's chapter, in my opinion, was amazing, simply because this was our biggest look so far at the original script for Dream Warriors. So many differences that went on tonight, so many. Freddy's backstory, instead of Neil finding that out, with Amanda's spirit and everything, instead we end up with Nancy finding out from a nurse that works, at Hathaway House, where Amanda Kruger had died, burnt to death while giving birth to her bastard son from being raped all those times at the county hospital she had been at. Totally different story for Freddy's backstory. But I do like the connection that he was burnt a little bit as a baby, and then later on in his life he died by fire, so that was kind of a cool little throwback there. I thought it would have been neat if that was expanded on more, and who knows, maybe with the remaining 4 or 5 chapters that are left in the book, we'll get a little more expansion on that story, but even if we don't, it was kind of a cool little nugget of information. Secondly, oh god, Joey's death. I mean, yeah, it was similar to the movie with the nurse and everything, but wow, this was a crazy scene. In fact, the entire dream sequence of Nancy going to get the claw, Kristen popping in there with her and everybody showing up, the fight with Freddy I thought was really cool, the whole dog thing, Freddy growing to be a lot bigger, and everything like that. Joey breaking off from the group to make sure they got the glove to take it back with them, and getting left behind, which led to his demise. with this girl he used to fawn over instead of a nurse. So that was really cool differences there. When they woke up and the dragon lady, Dr. Madalena, took the glove away from Nancy. I hope that's expanded on a little bit later. I would love for Dr. Madalena to get a gruesome death in this story, in this novelization. That would be awesome. But yeah, I mean, there was just so many differences from the movie in this chapter. It was just a lot of fun. The only thing I'm not digging is Neil is not involved as much as he was in the movie, and I really enjoyed his character. But other than that, I thought it was awesome. Let me know what you guys thought, if you're enjoying the differences from the movie, or if you're kind of bummed out about them and don't like them. Just hit me up in the comment section below. Let me know what you think, what you thought, and if you're looking forward to the rest of it. And I'll be back very soon with more. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and as always, pleasant dreams!